Do you believe in miracles? Why is the birth of a child a miracle? The complexity, function, and beauty of a human baby commands awe and reverence. 9 months is a long time. Sometimes it is made to seem longer by complications, discomforts, and emotional challenges, perhaps even conditions that are life-threatening. It takes courage, faith, patience, and teamwork. Miracles can be like that. I believe the birth of our nation was a miracle. Why? If we start with the Revolutionary War, though we could begin before, the history of the United States displays an uncanny pattern. At moments of crisis, when the odds seemed against success and disaster looked imminent, fate intervened to provide deliverance and progress. One of many examples has been described as the fog that changed the course of American history. August 27th, 1776. Hundreds of British ships filled New York's harbor, carrying 32,000 troops. It was one of the largest invasion forces in history to that date. That night, Washington made the desperate decision to evacuate his entire army by ferrying it across the East River to Manhattan Island. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, half of the American troops were still in danger, but a miraculously thick fog lingered, blocking the evacuation from being seen by the British. General Washington was on the last boat that left Brooklyn Heights. Had the Americans not been able to evacuate, they would have been captured, and Washington would have been hung. The war lasted 8 years, 1775 to 1783. Thousands of stories of courage and sacrifice could be told of the founding and defense of our nation. This is patriotism, the vigorous support of one's country. Our Constitution was ratified in 1788. The Bill of Rights Amendment in 1791. In addition, when it was founded, it was the only country in history to declare that the rights of its citizens came not through a king, but from God. Say it with me. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A nation was born. Miraculous. Fast forward to recent years, when many have answered the call to active military. Here are a few combat veterans who have been or are currently Arcadia area residents. World War II veterans: L. Waymont, U.S. Army officer of artillery group stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, living with his wife, Elois. After December 7, 1941, the military spouses were moved for protection to caves in Diamond Head and then to the mainland. Lieutenant Waymont was shipped out with his group and did not see his wife again for 3 years. Jack Doc Salter was drafted into the U.S. Army after completing a Ph.D. in physics, and he was put in charge of a mobile medical unit. He said, "I'm not that kind of doctor." He was told that didn't matter. He would be in charge of medical doctors and give the orders. His first deployment was North Africa in 1943, during the great tank battles where the front lines would move rapidly back and forth. His medical unit was overrun twice by the German army. He told me that they always kept a wounded German in the tent. So when a German officer came in, you would look around, see the German soldier being treated, and then leave. After the Axis forces surrendered Tunisia in 1943, the Germans gave Doc Salter several truckloads of medical supplies that they couldn't take with them. Later, Lieutenant Salter and his team were shipped to Italy and continued following the combat units north. He's the short one on the left. There he is in more recent years, standing under a sign, Salter Avenue in Arcadia. George Olson. In early 1945, he was an Army captain and led his team up through Leyte and Luzon in the Philippines with the dangerous task of flushing out enemy stragglers after the main force was driven out. When the Japanese surrendered in August 1945, a formal ceremony took place where Japanese officers turned over their samurai swords to Allied officers of equal rank. Jack McEwen and Chuck Hackett, two B-17 pilots during World War II, are still with us in Arcadia at ages 99 and 101. They enjoyed meeting each other last year and exchanging stories of their experiences in defending freedom. Jack flew 56 missions in the Pacific Theater. He spoke from this pulpit 2 years ago and is with us today. Lou Redding was in the Burma campaign from 1943 to the end of the war, aiding the Chinese during the Japanese invasion. He helped keep communications operational in the air and on the ground as a radio and electronics repairman, while cargo planes flew thousands of tons of critical supplies to China after the Burma Road was closed by the Japanese. Howard Sundberg, Army, 1943. After earning a degree in civil engineering, Howard was drafted and shipped out to the Aleutian Islands. The day before he left, he married his sweetheart, Jane, who said goodbye to him through a chain-link fence. He spent the next 2.5 years helping build runways critical to driving the enemy off the 2 islands they had captured in 1942. Roy Spears, B-17 pilot over Germany in 1944, flying out of England. On what would have been his 12th of 26 missions, he started to swing his legs up into the plane and passed out and fell to the ground. He was taken to the hospital and replaced by another pilot. Later that day, he learned that the plane in which he was to fly had been shot down with the entire loss of the crew. Bud Wheeler, at age 18, joined the U.S. Army, serving from August 1944 to October 1946, a member of the 108th Infantry Regiment. In the Philippines, they cleared remaining enemy from Leyte and then pressed on to the invasion of Mindanao. March through August 1945, when news of Japan's surrender was received. And Bud is with us today. Hiram Tierlink, a private in the 88th Infantry Division of the 6th Army, the Blue Devils, deployed in Italy at the same time Roy Spears was flying over Germany. He was wounded in May of 1944 when his team was charging Mount Damiano north of Rome. He was transported to safety on the back of a mule, which experience, he said, was more painful than getting shot. Ed McGuinness, on April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, the Navy's Fifth Fleet and more than 180,000 U.S. Army and Marine Corps troops descended on the Pacific island of Okinawa for a final push towards Japan. Both sides suffered enormous losses in the Battle of Okinawa. The Americans bore over 49,000 casualties, including 12,520 killed. Among the casualties was Corporal Ed McGuinness, who was strafed by an enemy machine gun, losing 2 fingers and surviving a bullet through the neck. Dean Johnson, U.S. Navy, Pacific Theater, a turret gunner on a Grumman PBM torpedo bomber, flying from several aircraft carriers, including the Wasp. Bob Hatch did a hitch in the U.S. Navy beginning in 1944. Near the end of his enlistment, he volunteered to be aboard one of the ships to witness an atomic bomb test in the Pacific. Operation Crossroads at the Bikini Atoll on 25th of July, 1946. Bob Hatch. Mike Parson, Army, Vietnam. In his words, quote, "I was wounded on March 21st, 1969, in Tay Ninh, which is outside of Saigon. I was sleeping in a supply tent when we were hit. I was hit by a mortar round. The right leg had to be amputated about 7 inches below the knee. At the time I was wounded, I was a radio operator on the helicopter pad. When the choppers came in, they would radio to me and I would tell them where to land. It was a fun job," unquote. Bruce Allen, U.S. Air Force, 1965 to 1993. He flew 100 missions in an F-4 Phantom in Vietnam and served 27 years in the Air Force. In his own words, quote, "Our squadron, initially 1967 and 68, provided air cover for U.S. strike forces, also made ground attacks against storage areas, bridges, and supplies being moved south. In addition, we flew cover for KC-135 tanker planes who were on station to provide pre- and post-strike fuel for missions going north." He made a career of the Air Force and retired in 1993 a lieutenant colonel. Bruce Allen. "Our flag does not fly because the wind moves it. It flies with the last breath of each soldier who died protecting it." These are some patriots that I have known here in the Arcadia area. You may be thinking of others. Me? Yes, I served in the Air Force. Stan Radden asked me several months ago if I would speak. I was surprised. I said, "Why me?" He replied that I was patriotic and served in the military. Patriotic? I was just trying to avoid the draft. Well, I couldn't turn Stan down, but I thought to myself, yes, I was in the Air Force from 54 to 58, which was after the Korean conflict and before Vietnam. For me, it was like a vacation. I got to travel, go to school, complain about the food. I didn't have to work very hard. And the most danger I faced during those 4 years occurred in Morocco when 4 of us took a day off and drove to Marrakesh in an old Volkswagen Bug that had no brakes. But today, what can we do to be patriots? Few of us will go into harm's way as members of the military or other dangerous service for our country. We can be patriotic by remembering and appreciating those who have gone and those who are out there today. We can be patriotic by reading some of the good history books written on the miracle of America. We can write how we feel about America, for our family, for our descendants. Thomas Jefferson said, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be." Benjamin Franklin said, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom." David McCullough, called by many America's historians, said this, quote, "We ought to be down on our knees every day, thanking God that we are part of this country, and we ought to know about the people who made it possible, and thank them, in effect, by showing interest in them." Let us go home tonight and promise ourselves that we will learn more about this great gift, this miracle we've been given. Let us commit that we will be more virtuous, more thoughtful, more appreciative, more patriotic. God bless America. Thank you.
Tomorrow all the things were gone, I worked for all my life, and I had to start again, with just my children and my wife. I thank my stars to be living here today, 'cause this life still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the ones who died.